Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Professor Nandini Saha from the Department of English, Diaspora University. The paper that we will be talking about today is New Literatures in English, and the module is titled Diaspora, Home and New English Literatures. And the module is of course authored by Mohaiminul Islam he's a research scholar at the University of Hyderabad. The learning objectives of this module is you will be given some definitions of diaspora so as to make you understand the various aspects of diaspora. Then we will be talking about what the Indian diaspora is, the history of the Indian diaspora. Terms like old and new diaspora will be discussed. Then terms like what happens to memory of home, what happens to these people who become diasporic people, memory of home, imaginary homeland, tradition and food. Then there will be discussion about diasporic literature with reference to some novels and one poem also. There will also be a distinction being given between diaspora and exile. What is the difference between these two terms? And then there will also be the connection will be spoken about between diasporic literature and new literature. What is the connection between these two? And then finally we will summarize the whole module. So about the module, the title of the module, as I mentioned, is Diaspora, Home and New English Literature, which explores the representation of the lives of the members of the diasporic communities and their negotiation in foreign lands. So it also explores how the memory of home makes them nostalgic, and they constantly think about returning to their own homeland. It also discusses how the diasporic people retain their diasporic identities, traditional cultures and food habits in the foreign lands. The module also reviews the relationship between these diasporic people and their homeland. Moreover, it examines the themes dealt with by several writers and in their writings in order to relate such literature to New English literature. This module will also discuss how the writings of these authors involve the quest for identity, the various themes: quest for identity, nostalgia, familial and marital relationships, apart from rerouting, uprooting and multiculturalism. The introduction to the concept of diaspora. The subject of diaspora immediately elicits basic questions of origin and location. Where do people come from? Where do they pause, rest, live? What routes have they traveled by? And yet the real and imagined worlds of all peoples, especially migrant people, have proven far too complex and contradictory to be easily serviced by any attempt to respond in singular terms to such compelling questions. So for a proper understanding of the term of diaspora, we also need to understand the importance of the term homeland, home, where these people are coming from, what traditions do they carry with them when they're going to foreign lands, what is the purpose of their travel, why are they traveling, where are they traveling, how are they traveling, because it is a process. Travel in itself is a process from one place to another. The movement of people from one place to another for several reasons is this whole is included in this whole concept of the diaspora. So we will now go to the various definitions of the term diaspora given by certain writers and theorists. From the etymological point of view, diaspora means the dispersion of Jewish population. So it's a very old term. But in the contemporary world, the word designates the people who leave their native land and take root in a foreign country, who travel to another country to live, reside and settle down there. According to William Safran, Diaspora refers to a community which was historically dispersed and share a common desire to return to the homeland. So while a group of people are traveling from their homeland to a different land, the desire or the want to get back to their homeland is always there within them. They might have traveled for work, for job purposes, for study, for other resources, but they have a pull to come back to their own homeland, wherever that might be, and return to where they come from. Another definition of the term diaspora is given by William Connor, who says diaspora is the segment of people living outside the homeland. So it does not, in William Connor's definition, you do not exactly get the idea of traveling abroad across national boundaries. It could be within the national boundary itself, just away from your homeland, just away from home. According to Stephen Wartovec, diaspora is any population which is considered deterritorialized or transnational. He is of course giving a very different definition from the earlier one that we spoke about, William Connor's. So Stephen Wartovec is talking about a diaspora who cross national boundaries, who do not stay within one nation, crossing national boundaries, hence transnational. So when situated in India, we have heard of several, and we probably know of several people who have traveled from India away to other lands. And much of literary history, of Indian literary history, will be able to provide for a very good record of the history of the Indian diaspora. The term Indian diaspora would refer to all persons of Indian descent who are living outside India. They preserve some major, they at least try to preserve some major Indian ethno-cultural characteristics as long as possible. This Indian diaspora is of around 25 million across the world. Indian diaspora began during the early 19th century and continued until the end of the British Raj. I would say even after that, even today, there is a large number of people moving away from India towards the West for various reasons. Vijay Mishra says that there are old diaspora. So there are two terms, old diaspora and new diaspora. Vijay Mishra distinguishes, saying that old diaspora are those people who migrated to the British, French and Dutch colonies during the 19th and early 20th century as indentured and Kangani laborers. So there was this group of, if you read the papers regularly, there are reports of, people from the Western countries who have been there for generations, went there as their forefathers, went there as laborers, indentured laborers, and they are coming back to the country now looking for their ancestral, coming to their homeland, the place where they originally belonged to, and they're looking for their family members, ancestors who've lived here, they stayed back here while these people had gone off to the far off lands as indentured laborers. So this, Vijay Mishra says, these group of people who had traveled so far back in time, these are the old diaspora. He also says that the new diaspora are those who migrated during the post-independence era to industrially developed countries of Europe and America as skilled workers and professionals. So there is a difference between the group of people who went abroad, say in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and the people who went in the post-independence era, as I said. So one group migrated till the independence and the other post-independence. So that is the distinction between old diaspora and the new diaspora. Okay, so old and new diaspora, Vijay Mishra defines old diaspora also as exclusive diaspora because they created relatively self-contained little India in the colonies. So when they were traveling and settling abroad, these people in the early times, they tried to form small groups, community living amongst themselves, which they call little Indias in the colonies. So they create their imaginary homeland in the foreign lands, but most of them do not have regular contact, did not have regular contact with their homeland. On the other hand, Mishra says that the new diaspora, as the late capital diaspora, mostly they move to study first, to go and educate themselves, then to do business and various kinds of jobs in the foreign lands. Most of them keep in touch with their homeland through family networks and marriage to support family and encourage being reunited, like as if they have a double consciousness. So while the earlier group, the members of the old diaspora, once they traveled to the foreign lands, they did not have much contact with the homeland. I also think that it is also because in those days connectivity or communication was a problem, right? It was not as well connected, technologically savvy as after developments have happened post-independence. And also there was a consciousness in the movement in the new diaspora. So the people who moved to foreign lands, members of the group of the new diaspora, they consciously went abroad because they wanted to study or they wanted to do business, earn more money to support family, go abroad, do better jobs, which still continues. This is a factor that still continues in today's world, where students, even if they get their education in India, tend to go abroad for jobs because of monetary factors, so that they can send money back home for a little better life. So Mishra makes these distinctions between the old diaspora, who would rather travel to foreign lands, settle down there, create little Indias in the colonies themselves, and the new diaspora, who tried to mingle, adapt to the new cultures, mingle in the new cultures or in the foreign land, but at the same time maintain a contact with their native people back home and also encourage being reunited. So they would make it a point, and they still do, to come back home once in a while, so they are in touch with their families, which the earlier group in the old diaspora could not. Of course, they did not go there very willingly. They went there as indentured laborers. So that's a very different group and a very different story altogether. One very important aspect of this diasporic people is the memory of home, what they leave behind. So the Indian diasporic people are known to have a lot of nostalgia for the village, town, city that they leave behind, the culture, the language, the food, the art, the cinema, everything that comprises the culture of the land that they leave and go to the foreign lands. The Indian diaspora construct their imaginary homeland in the foreign lands to compensate for the void that is created in their lives, because they are away from their own land, from their own tradition, from their own cultural ethos. So to compensate for that, they create this kind of an imaginary homeland in the foreign land that they are now residing in. The different communities carry with them the deep traditions of their own customs, practices, values, beliefs. Like the Hindu community, which has constructed some have constructed a number of temples, in fact, in the foreign lands that they go to, which are known as the host lands. And sometimes these structures resemble the temples that they are used to visiting in their own home country. Thus, they can maintain their religious identity and practice their religion in the faraway lands. So, for example, you would hear of, the Bengalis celebrating the Durga Puja, even in America, even in Australia, New Zealand, wherever. In all the European, American, anywhere away from India, these people have made it a point to find a temple, which was, of course, constructed by Indians naturally, and in the shape and form of the temples that they find here in India. And each community, whether it's the Gujarati community, because you will hear of the Navratri being celebrated, the Dandiya dance programs being held. So now over, because we are so technology savvy, we get connected with each other over the across the borders. We get to know of such celebrations happening away from India. They want to create again, small Indian communities amongst themselves. They want to recreate the feeling of being in India in those foreign lands. What is cultural identity? Because we are talking about this group of people who leave behind a land, but they carry within themselves these seeds of, culture, tradition. So what is cultural identity, therefore? According to Stuart Hall, identity is not as transparent or unproblematic as we would want to think of it. The term cultural identity denotes a shared culture, a sort of collective, single, true self hiding inside the many other more superficial or artificially imposed selves which people with a shared history and ancestry hold in common. So, cultural identity, therefore, is that probably those common sentiments, those common emotions, those common beliefs, values. Say, for example, if an Indian is traveling from India to the United States, even if he doesn't meet, probably he's a Bengali, and even if he doesn't meet any other Bengali, it might take him a while to find other Bengalis, not that uncommon these days. However, even if he meets any other Indian, whether he's a Gujarati, whether he's a Keralite, whatever community he might belong to, there are certain common elements that an Indian, being an Indian, would believe in. So these are markers of the cultural identity of the Indian community. So it does not necessarily have to be a regional community. So a Bengali will definitely have some definitive qualities, or a Gujarati, or someone from Tamil Nadu, someone from Andhra will have their different cultural beliefs or whatever. But there will be certain common Indian sentiments, Indian emotions, Indian values, and that determines their cultural identity. In a multicultural context, the issue of cultural identity becomes problematic because of the differences in self-definition and self-representation by the diaspora on the one hand, and the categorization by the people of the host country, distinguishing the diaspora as they vis-a-vis their we on the other. So cultural identity, therefore, becomes very important because in the foreign land, the people of the host country tend to categorize between the people the immigrants, the migrant people who have landed there in their land as they, as against their we. So there is a distinction of the other being characterized here, the other being the people who are foreign in that land. So an Indian who's traveling to the United States of America will be a foreigner in America. To the Americans, the Indian is the foreigner, right? So their cultural identity, so it becomes very important for the Indian, therefore, to be very sure of that of his or her cultural identity, of his or her Indian identity. When a person moves, as I said, there are certain elements of culture, tradition that he takes with himself when traveling abroad. One of such other elements is food habits, right? So tradition and food habits acquire a distinctive valence and a distinctively gendered valence in diasporic and migrant communities. This is a quote from Purnima Mankekar. There are some of the Indian foods that are highly loved by Indians, like dahi bhat, dahi butti, tandoori chicken, chicken tikka masala, and so on. These foods are popular even in foreign lands. I mean, even foreigners are very fond of. If you go to England, there's this whole culture of the curry culture, and that came from the Indian. It's a simple curry that we make at home in various ways. Of course, in different regions, we have different ways of making the curry. But if you go to England, there's probably, I've heard, packet, a powder packet, which they put in everything and make an Indian curry. So there's no distinction between, the northeastern or the eastern or the western Indian curry. It's just the Indian curry. So there's a curry culture there. So it is because of the several Indians who've traveled from here to abroad. And now in Europe, I was recently, I had visited Germany, and they are very fond of Darjeeling tea. And they go crazy if you just take a small packet of Darjeeling tea for them. So there are certain elements of Indian food culture which have become very popular in the foreign land, and that is because of the fact that the Indians who've traveled abroad, they have helped to popularize such elements of their food items. Poroma Roy says that it is especially the Indian women in foreign lands who give priority to cook Indian food, because they say this is one way of maintaining their cultural identity abroad. In fact, because we have the internet these days and it's so easy to access the internet and find out about what's going on around the world, if you open the internet, there are so many Indian women. They've studied in India, and once they are there, they are popularizing. They've opened, they call them, I think they're called the food vans these days. It's happening in India also, but abroad they have food vans which sell only Indian food, right? And these are things that are now shown in our movies everywhere, that people are going abroad to and popularizing and making elements of Indian culture, food, tradition. Dress is another thing that is very popular. You have, whenever any foreign British, American Prime Minister, President or their wives wear a sari or a salwar kameez, it is, they are recognizing, it is also a recognition of the fact that, the categories that we just spoke about, that these are migrant people who've come from a different land, and there is this categorization and differentiation between we and they, that will somehow be kind of minimized when there is an acceptance and recognition of the fact that these are things that are good about India, which was not the case in earlier times. Anything about India was not really very good earlier, but these days things have started to change. Things about Indian culture, food, dress have been started to be accepted, recognized in the foreign world, and also being adapted. Now we will talk about kind of a theoretical aspect actually, but it is a term used in literary theory and criticism, term which we say it as the imaginary homeland. The term comes from Salman Rushdie's use of it in his title of the collection of essays that he published, titled Imaginary Homelands, Essays and Criticism, 1981 to 1991. It was published in 1991. And there are several essays on several aspects of immigration and diaspora. But the one important aspect that Rushdie discusses in this is the quest for home, search for home. The diasporic people, when they travel from their native land to the foreign land, they are on a constant search, on a constant quest for that place they call home. Vijay Mishra describes the concept of the diasporic imaginary homeland as follows. I use it to refer to any ethnic enclave in a nation state that defines itself consciously or unconsciously, or because of the political self-interest of a racialized nation state, as a group that lives in displacement. So a group that has moved from one land to another and have probably come together for several reasons. It could be political self-interest, it could be, to build a community amongst themselves, and they create a kind of a home atmosphere. far away in that land, and hence the imaginary homeland, because that is not their homeland. Their homeland is probably India, but they find like-minded people from their same land, from their same nation, from the same country, and form a group and create a kind of a community. They build a communion so that they can have the same feeling of being at home which they would have in their own land. Slavoj Žižek defines the imaginary as the state of identification with the image in which we appear likable to ourselves, with the image what we would like to be. So Žižek is essentially talking about the kind of connectivity or the kind of connection that these diasporic people would want to make with, some people of the same community, same nation, state, where they find some kind of semblance of sameness, that we come from the same culture, that we come from the same nation, we come from the same country. Hence they create that community, hence they create that communion, which therefore brings in the concept of imaginary homeland. We have spoken about various aspects of the diaspora, definitions of the diaspora, how the diasporic people function, what happens to them when they move. Now we will talk about diasporic literature. And this is a very important aspect in today's world, because we know that a lot of diasporic literature has gained in importance and have won several awards, recognition, accolades, even from the West. So the term diasporic literature, therefore, is used to define the works that are written by authors who live outside of their native land. It can also be defined as, so it is not only the author who determines what diasporic literature is, it could also be in the content, in the sense, a person living in the same country but not in the place that he was born in might show the same elements of diasporic literature in his or her writing. So it can be defined by its contents regardless of where it has been written in. It discusses the themes, diasporic literature discusses the themes of migrancy, of the feeling of being a migrant, nostalgia, alienation, displacement, adaptability to a new country and culture through several experimental techniques. So while these are the themes that diasporic literature usually talks about, the various themes that this kind of diasporic literature gets involved in are experimental techniques like magic realism, historiographic metafiction, use of indigenous indigenous language and narrative forms. So you will find diasporic writers using a lot of the traditional Indian diasporic writers using a lot of the traditional Indian narrative folk forms of narration in their novel writing. Many Indian diasporic writers have written about the problems of poverty, caste distinction, bad sanitation in India. Probably they find it easier to write about the ills of Indian society because being at a distance accords them the objectivity of perspective that is required. So for example, for someone living in India and talking about the difficulties or the bad kind of life that goes on here is a little difficult because we live in those circumstances. We are living our day-to-day lives in these circumstances. They become our regular life. So it's very difficult for us to criticize or critique that kind of life. But once someone goes away from here to a faraway land, sitting there and looking at a distance at India, from a distant land, looking at India from a distance, gives them that kind of an objective perspective to be able to analyze, to be able to, justify or analyze or critique the situations, the economic, cultural, various kinds of drawbacks because they're always there in all societies, all cultures. But Indian diasporic writers have not shied away, have not avoided the fact that they also need to talk about the ills of the society that they come from. So now we'll discuss a little bit about the difference between the terms exile and diaspora. Difference between exile and diaspora may lie in a work's attitude toward the homeland and toward migration. In a nutshell, the word exile defines migrant people and non-resident people, and even the people who roam from one place to another for a better life and to fulfill their heart's desire. The word also indicates the forced nature of migration, and that is important, and the novelty of the experience of leaving the homeland. On the other hand, from the etymological root of the word, diaspora defines the scattering of a population. In its modern usage, the term defines the people who leave their homeland and settle in the foreign land. Some of the important diasporic writers would be V.S. Naipaul, Salman Rushdie, Bharti Mukherjee, Amitav Ghosh, Jhumpa Lahiri, Rohinton Mistry, Arvind Adiga, Anita Desai, Meera Nair, Vikram Seth, Anjali Joseph, but only these are just a few names among a lot many more who are there. Some selected works of diaspora would be A House for Mr. Biswas, Area of Darkness, The Mimic Men, Mappings, The Middle and Other Stories, Jasmine, Homeless by Choice, A Suitable Boy, East West, Interpreter of Maladies, The Namesake, Another Country, The Lowland. Themes of diasporic writings involve the quest for identity, nostalgia, familial and marital relationships, apart from rerouting, uprooting multiculturalism. Diasporic writers have been writing all kinds of literature: travelogues, autobiographical novels, drama, poetry, short stories. The varied themes of such writing also focus on migrancy, alienation, adaptability to a new country, and culture. Okay, so A House for Mr. Biswas is a 1961 novel by V.S. Naipaul, where he essentially talks about an Indo-Trinidadian, which Naipaul himself was, and it's kind of a semi-autobiographical novel where he talks about how he gets married and then he is looking for a house, and that becomes the crux of the novel, looking for the house, looking for the home, as far as a diasporic writer or a diasporic character is concerned. East West is an anthology of short stories written by the controversial and award-winning author Salman Rushdie, and he's constantly dealing with the dialectics between East and West. Interpreter of Maladies is again a collection of short stories by Jhumpa Lahiri, and being an Indian American herself, because she moved to America, she is able to understand, analyze and examine the issues at stake for an Indian American, the various trials, tribulations, through the various relationships that she depicts in in the various stories here. Jasmine is a novel written by Bharti Mukherjee, where she talks about the central theme of the novel is a conflict between two different cultures, again focusing on the multiculturalism that diasporic people have to face. A Suitable Boy is Vikram Seth's novel and one of the more acclaimed novels, where it is essentially talking about a Hindu mother who's searching for a suitable son-in-law for her daughter. But through that story, Vikram Seth is trying to talk about all kinds of things: land rights, interreligious marriages, identity crisis. Vikram Seth, of course, is he's traveled away from India now. He doesn't live in India anymore, and from that objective perspective that we spoke about, he's able to deal with these Indian issues very well. We will quickly try and talk about a poem by Vikram Seth, and this is titled Rakhi for Aradhana. I had forgotten the time of year your Rakhi came, showing how things have changed and are the same. It was a contract of trust with more than you. I know I left my home too many years ago. I place the golden thread across my wrist, that done, struggle with my left hand to tie it on. Rakhi is an Indian Hindu festival, which is a celebration essentially of the love and bond between a brother and a sister. And for people who live abroad, it's almost a yearly ritual, an annual ritual for the sister to send the Rakhi abroad for the brother. And here is a brother who's got the Rakhi, received the Rakhi, and the coming arrival of the Rakhi brings back memories of, cultural memories, traditional memories, memories of the sister back home, and he's struggling to tie it on, because being away for many years, as the poet says in the poem, he's lost that essence of what such cultural events mean to people in India, but he ties the Rakhi on. So probably it helps to tie him, the thread that is being tied on his wrist helps him to keep him tied to his homeland, to the cultural values of his homeland. New literature is a coinage for the new literary trends evident in literary works which diasporic literary theory examines from the early decades of the 21st century. Now, the new literatures deal with issues of ethnic plurality and hybridity, as well as literary negotiations of colonization, decolonization, migration, diaspora, social inequality. Today's narratives of personal history, memoirs, recollections all fall within the category of new literature. It emphasizes the close reading, particularly of travelogue and autobiographical fiction and non-fiction, to discover how a work of literature engages with the sense of loss and alienation in foreign lands. And that is where diasporic literature is connected to new literature. In conclusion, the new literature in English also discusses the theme of migrancy, alienation, adaptability to a new country and culture. In the books of the writers that we've mentioned, Naipaul, Bharati Mukherjee, Chitra Banerjee Devakaruni, Anita Banerjee, Salman Rushdie, who wrote about their life experiences from the point of view of a diasporic writer. Many writers have written about the problems of poverty, caste distinction, bad sanitation in India, which also become subjects for new literature. For the last few decades, there has been a renewed interest in the study of the diaspora and the literature by diasporic writers for several of these reasons that they talk about in their works. Diasporic writings explore various themes, including the ones that I've already mentioned, also the memory of the native land, nostalgia, representation of India in foreign land. You know, the diasporic people, they actually these days, they are seen as ambassadors of the country that they come from. So they have a responsibility to perform how they represent their country in the foreign land, and identities and politics related to identities and negotiations for survival in the foreign lands. Summary of the module. We are into the last phase. This module has given various kinds of definitions of the diaspora, of the term diaspora, and also shown the differences between the term diaspora and exile. We've mentioned how one is a conscious decision to move, the other is a forced movement. The main focus of the module, however, has been to represent the memory of home, which will help the students and readers to understand and empathize with the basic issue of nostalgia of the diasporic people. It has also been the endeavor to show how the diasporic people retain their traditional cultures, language and food habits in the host societies, and for what reasons. For a few important writers and for a better understanding of diaspora and their relationship with home, the module has analyzed a few important writers and their writings. This module will also be very helpful for the students and readers who want to understand the reality of being a diaspora and diasporic writer. Finally, in conclusion, an attempt has been made to establish a relation between diasporic writings and English literatures or new English literatures, which will help widen the ideas of the students and readers. Thank you.